All right, good morning. I'm Mr. DuPont coming to you from the at-home biology classroom, aka my backyard. And today we're going to be focusing on photosynthesis, the all-important process of photosynthesis. Before we get into any of the details, though, I want to first kind of recap our last lesson, okay, about energy transformation. Remember that all energy on this planet ultimately comes from the sun. That energy, that light energy, gets absorbed by organisms that can carry out photosynthesis. They convert that energy into a form of chemical energy, glucose, that gets broken down in the mitochondria by organisms like ourselves, as well as plants and other living things. And then that converts that energy into ATP, hush Bristol, okay? And then we use that ATP molecule, it's the energy currency of the cell. We use that energy molecule to do all life's processes, and the energy ultimately leaves as heat, okay? All right, now getting into photosynthesis, of course, photosynthesis, when we think about photosynthesis, usually we think plants. And so we'll start this out with observation of a few of the plants we've got going on here. Here's a tomato plant that we transplanted several weeks ago. You can see the roots. This guy's ready to get in the ground. It's one of the ones that we also planted over here in our garden, our tomato garden. This one was a casualty this morning of playing ball with the dog. Got snapped off. We're gonna see if maybe there's enough growth going on there that he can regenerate. He's like the, oh yes, he has a name. He's Rocky, the survivor. Okay. All right, and so here's the big question of the morning. This, of course, is our Venus flytrap, one of them. Okay, got some cool things going on there. The question is, like all plants, or at least most of them anyway, Venus flytraps are green. So do they carry out photosynthesis? I mean, they eat animals, they eat insects, of course. And so do they eat insects, or do they carry out photosynthesis, or do they do both? That's the question of the day. We'll come back to that at the end of the lesson. Oh yeah, we got this one's starting to flower. This is gonna be little flowers. You can see another one up here. So it's springtime. Everything's reproducing, including the Venus flytraps. All right, let's talk about the. Actually, I forgot to mention, I'm going to do this sort of in a two-part series. I'm going to get into the basics of photosynthesis, and then in the next video, we'll talk about some of the details. Okay, so one of the things that you guys absolutely have to know, of course, is that the neighbor's dogs bark a lot, but also the chemical equation for photosynthesis. So let's just go through it real quick. First of all, if you break down the word photosynthesis, photo means light, synthesis means to make. And so what we are making ultimately with light is glucose. So let's go through the formula. Anything that can carry out photosynthesis, plants, algae, certain kinds of bacteria even can do this. Okay, they take in carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, they take in water from their environment somehow, they need light, and so the sun is oftentimes the source of that, but not always. Okay, and they are able to convert those materials into a different kind of material, glucose and oxygen. Okay, now if we're going to be specific, when we look at this equation, technically we have to balance it. In other words, just like in algebra, whatever's on one side of the equation has to be on the other side of the equation. So what we'll typically do here is go
Bristol.
Add the coefficient 6 here, the coefficient 6 here, and the coefficient 6 here, and that gives us a balanced equation. You'll learn a lot more about how to balance chemical equations next year in chemistry. But one of the things that you definitely have to understand is that when we look at a chemical equation like photosynthesis, whatever's on the left side of this yield arrow, and I think we went over this earlier in the year, is referred to the reactants. Whatever's on the right side of the yield arrow is referred to as the products. And so what happens during a chemical equation is that the bonds of these molecules are broken and rearranged to form these molecules here. So photosynthesis, of course, is going to take place in plants. Where exactly in the plants? Well, the leaves, the mesophyll cell layer of the leaves is where most of the chloroplasts are going to be found. By the way, I encourage you to go back and take a look at that energy PowerPoint that I put in Google Classroom All these details that I'm talking about today can be found in illustrations like these and in some significantly more detail. So please go back and take a look at those. Anyway, chloroplast is where it all takes place. So here's our chloroplast. We're going to just walk through real quickly the basic parts of the chloroplast, okay? Because there are certain things that take place in certain parts and other processes take place in other parts that you need to know about, okay? So here is our general chloroplast. Remember, it's double membrane, all right? And you know, like the mitochondria, it's going to be involved in energy transformation. So what happens, what we need to identify as far as the parts of the chloroplast go, okay? What we usually see inside the chloroplast are these little round discs. You can see I've drawn them in a couple different places here. These round discs, okay, each one is referred to as a thylakoid. Okay? Thylakoid. Alright? Now, the entire stack of thylakoids, generally they're going to be arranged in stacks like this, for what it's worth, is referred to as a granum, or excuse me, a grana. And then a bunch of grana or granum. Not really all that important. But the important thing is that in the thylakoids are structured out of also a membrane structure, okay? And embedded in that membrane is the, I guess I should probably stick with green here, but embedded in the membrane are the pigments that you know of as chlorophyll that do the light absorbing, that make the plant green. Now the whole discussion of light is a pretty interesting one. Okay, when we talk about light, what is it? It's photon particles. And the sun is emitting photon particles. They make their way to Earth, 93 million mile journey. They get absorbed by a plant, and then part of that light gets reflected back to us, and we see it as green. So when we look at plants as green, technically they're not actually green. They're actually every color but green. What we see is the part of the light, the spectrum of light that does not get absorbed by the plants. The part that gets reflected back is the part we see, and we see it as green. But it's these chloroplasts, or excuse me, chlorophyll, that are the pigments. You need to know what a pigment is. A pigment is a light absorbing molecule. Things like chlorophyll A, chlorophyll B, you know, there's some accessory pigments. They all absorb different wavelengths of light, but ultimately what they don't absorb is the green, okay? And so that's why we see grass and tree leaves and all those different kind of things as green, okay? Interesting thing, look that up. All right, so the thylakoid is important because this is where a certain part, well, we'll get into that in the next one. Let's just call it the thylakoid. And then out here, outside the thylakoid, the other area you need to be familiar with is called the stroma, okay? So that's really all you need to know about the chloroplast. It's membraned, okay? It's got these thylakoids, which are also made up of membrane. Embedded in that membrane is the pigments. Let's go ahead and label that one. We'll go ahead and call this one chlorophyll. Okay, is there two L's? I forget. What are two L's? Whatever. Chlorophyll. Okay? All right? And the thylakoid membrane are what does that, right? And then, of course, outside the thylakoids, the other area of the chloroplast that's going to be important to us is the stroma. Okay? Now, in the next video, I'm going to get into the details of what's going on in the chloroplast. Okay? So that's coming up. I'll try and keep that video a little bit shorter. Okay? Well, let's go back to before we close this one out, let's go back to our Venus flytrap here and answer our question. Does it carry out photosynthesis? Yes, it does. Okay, it carries out photosynthesis. The green in the leaves of this plant are what indicate that it's absorbing sunlight and carrying out photosynthesis. Why does it eat insects then? Does anybody remember? We had this class discussion, I think at least once before. All organisms need nitrogen. Okay, if you look at the environment that we find these guys in, you know, it's boggy soil, really saturated. All the nitrogen has been leached out. So they capture insects to supplement the nitrogen that they need for building proteins for growing and so forth. And of course, photosynthesis is the primary process that helps put together the sugars and the ATP ultimately that is going to be required for growth and development of organisms like plants. Okay? All right, we'll catch the rest of the video coming up.